So let's talk today about the value of spiritual bypassing. There's value here. We hear often that to align with and acknowledge and abide the divine self, the pure divinity of being, and pay more attention to that or have more interest in that, or give more value to that truth of being than to our stories and narratives generated by the mind, is to spiritually bypass. We're bypassing the pain, the suffering, the difficulty, the fear, the doubt, the disempowering thoughts. We're bypassing those and going directly to our truth, where we might find nourishment, peace, and grace. The issue with spiritual bypassing is that we then are not doing our work to address, to heal the narratives, the disempowering thoughts, feelings, beliefs that are bubbling up out of our conditioning. What I'm recommending here, what I'm inviting us to do, is to learn how to spiritually bypass temporarily as we're going through our days and our nights and our lives, how to meet those disparaging or troubling or limiting or confining, disempowering thoughts, beliefs, narratives. How to bypass them temporarily while we're going through our day, to realize what they are and go, no, I'm not giving power to that any longer. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But then, to give ourselves the time and the place and the space to return to those wounded feelings, to those feelings and thoughts that are arising out of a wounded dynamic of ourselves. To give ourselves the time and the space and the place. To bring ourselves back to that feeling, back to that wound, back to that hurt. And shine the light of love upon it. To bring the grace of our divine self that we're awakening to now as an adult. To bring that to the old wound, which is typically coming from a child perspective. See, as children, we weren't necessarily safe. We didn't have the wherewithal to take care of ourselves, to protect ourselves, to tap into a divine truth. We were very much at the mercy of the world and those around us. And we had every right to feel scared, vulnerable, hurt, afraid. We didn't know how to make sense of the world, and so we just learned what we were told. Whether we were told we weren't worthy unless we met these certain levels, these certain criteria that make you lovable, but if you don't reach that level of criteria, worthiness, and you're not lovable. We just took all of that on because we didn't know any better. So that child perspective, until it is rewired, rewritten, brought into the light of truth as an adult, as a mature and capable adult. We want to let that childish story know that at the time it was completely appropriate. But it's not true any longer that we need to protect ourselves so fervently and not take risks because we might be rejected or abandoned or love may be withdrawn. We now know we can survive that. We now know that if somebody withdraws love or ridicules, that it has more to do with them than us. And we know that our truth, our divine grace, cannot be diminished. Cannot be diminished. But we didn't know that as children. So we carry these fears, these doubts, and these uncertainties. And they will bubble up as thoughts, as feelings, as beliefs when we are presented with something in our modern day lives, in our current lives, that feel threatening to that child programming, to that child wound. We'll feel scared, disempowered, angry, defensive, argumentative. We will be reactive because a wound, when it is poked, hurts. We want to stop the poking, so we're going to do everything we can to protect that wound. The invitation here is that when we feel anything that is less than boundless love, basically, when we feel anything that feels narrowing, diminishing, that feels like we are contracting, defending, isolating in a way that creates very much an us and them dynamic. We know that when we are feeling disempowered or small or less than in our wholeness, we know what that feels like. The invitation here is that when those feelings arise now, that we bypass them, we don't feed them. We pull out of them and we gain the true perspective of our being, our pure loving awareness, and notice them for what they are. Oh, there's my pain. Oh, there's my conditioning. There's my story. There's my narrative acting up. Now, I don't want to keep denying that because there's some healing that needs to be done there. But in this moment, during my day, I don't have the space, the capacity. It's not the right moment to do the healing, to do the work. So I'm going to bypass it for now. I'm going to come back into my truth. I'm going to let go of that feeling, that fear, that wound for now. And I'm going to, what is often called, give it to God. It's just a construct. It's a programming. It's a triggering. It's an old narrative. It's a neural firing. It arises. It has no actual substance. There's nothing really to it except for thoughts and patterning, conditioning. So when it arises, you can say, no, that's just not true. And I now, through my meditations and my studies, practices, I know the essential truth of being that is never not true, never not there. I now know how to access the boundless nature of my being. The analogy that we often use is the sky above the weather. When we start to drop into the storm, and the clouds are getting thick, and the storm is getting tumultuous, we can get lost in the storm, or we can bypass the storm by pulling out of it and recognizing I am the unconditional loving awareness of all emotions, all thoughts, all narratives that come and go and arise, and pass and rise, all. I am the divine grace of love. So I'm bypassing the suffering of going with the thought and going with the feeling. I'm saying no. I'm not going to do that. I know the truth. I'm going to pull out of the storm and come to rest in my truth. so that I can get through my day, so I can move through the moment, the situation. Accessing love, accessing peace, accessing wholeness, accessing my divine grace, and live life in grace. And then later, I may want to sit for a while and say, I really felt some pain today. Some old dynamic arose because clearly it's not healed. Let me sit in my meditation and bring myself to my center, to my truth, to my wholeness, to the love that I am. And now let me recall that hurt, recall that fear, recall that tenderness, recall that vulnerability into the light of truth that I'm sitting in right now. Let me recall the pain into this moment, and we're going to find some dynamic of our child that still doesn't feel safe. It still feels so threatened by failure, by the possibility of love being withdrawn. It feels threatened by what others may think. And while we sit in our truth and our love, we can invite that young story forward and let that child know we're not a child any longer. We have the wherewithal and we have the spiritual awakening, the spiritual knowing now available of who we really are. We have that available. We can let that child know it doesn't need to hold that perspective any longer. It served then. We can let it go now. We can let it go. We can let that child feel the power of love. We can let that child feel the embrace of love and wholeness and peace. So that child can know peace, so the child can know love, so the child can know strength. And say, oh, okay, I don't have to keep being triggered. I'm okay now. I get it. I'm not a child any longer. We are not a child any longer. Integrating all of our dynamic thoughts, stories, narratives of self, integrating them all back into the one truth of love. We can do that in our practices, in our chosen times of, all right, I'm going to do some healing now. I'm going to do some loving now. I'm going to do some integration now. We sit and we come back into the love through our practices, through our meditation. And then we recall something that happened during the day. Oh yeah, there was that. Oh, what was that? What part of me was that? Oh, there it is. Oh, that's my 5-year-old. Oh, that's my 7-year-old reliving an abandonment. Oh, that's my young self reliving the unsafe household in which I grew up. Oh, I'm not there any longer. That's not true any longer. Oh, I can let that go because that dynamic is no longer present. So we choose our time to do the healing. But during our day, during our regular living life, when we are visited by those fears and doubts and uncertainties and stories and disempowering narratives, we can bypass them. See them, watch them, witness them with love and curiosity. Oh wow, ooh wow, check that out. There's my story. There's my pain. Oh, clearly I've got some more work to do in that regard. I'll do that later this evening. I'll do that tomorrow morning. I'll do that at a dedicated time and place. But right now, I can just let it go because I know that there's no substance to it. It's just neural firings of belief, conditioning, habit. And in the moment, I can take a deep breath, and because I've practiced and because I know now how to directly access the peace that I always am, because I've been awakening as who I really am, awakening. Peace, truth, love has been awakening to itself. So it's more available quickly, rapidly, within a breath or two. During my day, when I feel those old disempowering thoughts, I just stop. I just stop. No, that's not true. Why would I want to continue entertaining this idea that I know is nothing more than an idea, a belief, a habit of thinking? Why would I want to entertain that when I know that the divine nature of being is always present? It gets veiled by these thoughts. It gets covered. It gets clouded by these old thoughts. So I can just stop. Say, I'm not going to live in the clouds. I'm going to pull back. I'm going to pull out. I'm going to remember who I really am. So I can be in my life with peace, with grace, with love. And that's a spiritual bypassing, temporarily. But we don't want to do that all the time. We want to set aside time, set aside space to intentionally return to love and then bring forward into the moment the awareness of our pain, the awareness of our story. So we can do some healing. Love shining into the darkness of stories, shining into the darkness of programming, of habit, shining love upon the fear of the child. You're okay now. We're no longer a child. That dynamic is no longer at play. You know your wholeness now. You didn't know it as a child. You do now. You're okay. You're okay. No matter what, you're okay. So temporary spiritual bypassing is hugely valuable. It keeps us from cascading, falling down the rabbit hole of disempowering thoughts as they arise. Bypass them. Give them back to God. Say, you take care of this, and from the perspective I work with, that God you're giving that to is just your higher truth. I'll end with this. It's basically saying, put down all that does not serve you. Put down anything and everything that is disempowering, that makes you feel like you're a separate little ego being, disconnected from your truth, which is boundless love. Put down, as soon as it arises, anything that appears as a weight, as a heaviness, as a darkness, as a cloudiness. Feel it, notice it, and go, this isn't true. How do I know it's not true? Because it doesn't feel good. I know it's not true because it doesn't feel good. So as soon as I feel that, I'm going to put it down. Take a few breaths, return to my truth. But then later on, I'm going to go back and I'm going to revisit that pain, that suffering, that story, that narrative, find out where it's coming from, what version of me, what young dynamic of me is still feeling unloved, that is still feeling small, unsafe, vulnerable, afraid. And I'm going to bring that into the light of love. And let all parts of me know you're okay. You're okay. You are divine. You are whole. You are eternal. You are the power and grace of love. It can meet any moment, in any condition, in any situation, and not be diminished. And not be diminished. All right, much love. Blessings.